Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and I am here to help answer any questions you may have about building a cloud architect career, a security architect career, an enterprise architect career, an AI architect career, or any other architect career for that matter. I've been an architect now for a little over 26 years. I've held every kind of a role, whether it's a principal solutions architect role or an enterprise architect role or a platform architect. And I'm here to be able to answer any questions you have so you can join these wonderful architecture careers. They're fantastic careers, but so many confuse architecture, things like cloud architecture with cloud engineering, and they're not the same. And that's why I'm here to help you build your career. So bring me your questions and I'll do what I can to answer them. Now, if you don't know me, my name's Mike Gibbs. I've been in this architecture world for a few decades. I've spent about 2 decades training people to be architects. You can find architects that I've trained at companies like Apple and Amazon and Cisco and Google and IBM and Microsoft and Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, big banks like JP Morgan Chase, PNC Bank or Barclays Bank, security firms like Palo Alto Networks or Zscaler or Netbook. And I want to help you too. So ask me your questions. Before we begin the questions, I want to let you know about 2 free things that we have going on for you right now to help with your architecture career. Tomorrow, we're going to hold a webinar. It is at 1 p.m. Eastern time on how to become a cloud architect. How to become an enterprise architect. We'll talk about what we do as enterprise architects. We'll talk about the skills that you need to be an enterprise architect. We'll talk about what hiring managers want in an enterprise architect, how to build your enterprise architect portfolio, and even the kind of certifications you should get, the things that should be on your resume, and of course, a little bit of tips on how to win the interview. And it's completely free. That enterprise architecture webinar is live on Zoom, so you can ask me any questions you want in real life. Now, I also wanted to let you know that in the description of this video, there are many free guides to help you build your architecture career, guides on how to win the interview, guides on the skills you need to be an architect. So sign up for some. They're completely free. Let me know how you enjoy them, and I'm sure they'll help you in your career. So let's bring in the first set of questions. See if any questions are back there. What skills are required to become a cloud architect? What a great question. So I want to very briefly explain the difference between a cloud architect and a cloud engineer. So when I talk about the skills, you'll understand. A cloud engineer is a system builder, meaning they're the hands-on technology professionals that make the cloud work. That is a cloud engineer. Now, we cloud architects, by comparison, are something very different. We coordinate the organization's cloud strategy. We coordinate the organization's adoption process. And we architects are focused on trying to help the business get to a certain business outcome. That means we're going to be looking at what are the risks, what are the trade-offs, and what is the best architecture that we can create to support this company and their business goals at this time right now. So we're not like the cloud engineer that's going to be focused on implementation. They're going to be hands-on with tools. We're in much more of an executive role. We're in an advisory role. So because of that, we need 4 kinds of skills. And what I'll do is I'll pull up a slide that I have because I deliver these architecture webinars fairly common, and I'll be able to give you some visuals on this. But you need 4 sets of skills to be an architect, and I'll explain why. You need technical skills, though not like an engineer, but you still need technical skills, and we'll talk about what they are. You will need business skills, and we'll talk about why that is. You will need executive skills, and you will need communication skills. And if you don't have all of these skills, you're just not going to get hired. And that's why we teach all of these skills and these skill categories to everyone we work with. And that's why people that have taken other boot camps come to us, and then we get them hired by retraining them with the right set of skills. So let me talk about why the technical skills you need first, because that's where everybody wants to start, with the technical skills. And while I tell you that, I do want you to understand that probably 75% of the role is non-technical, but I'm still going to start with the technical skills. So from a technical skills perspective, you have to have some degree of knowledge of AI. How are AI systems designed? How could you scale the AI systems? What goes into them to a degree? Now, while we architects don't need to code, We definitely need to understand applications. What kind of applications can drive business strategy and affect business performance? How might these applications be integrated? What type of an application architecture pattern makes sense? For example, one would be using microservices versus a monolith. We cloud architects need to understand compute. So we understand when a system should be, say, on a bare metal server versus a virtual machine versus a container versus a function as a service type environment. And we architects need to understand data, and not because we're going to write SQL queries or touch any databases in our job, but because we're going to have to help protect an organization with data. That means we're going to have to understand relational databases and how to scale them, understand NoSQL databases and how to stand them, understand data warehouses, data lakes, data pipelines, and all those types of things, because we're going to be designing that for business reasons. We need to be able to design a way to keep the business's systems up and running after an outage. That's called disaster recovery planning. We need to have good, strong knowledge of identity and access management, which is effectively who are you, what are you allowed to do, and keeping track of what you've done. You obviously need to know networking and network design because nothing works without the network. And you'll have to have good, strong security knowledge. How do we secure cloud systems? And of course, storage. And that means, whether we're dealing with block storage, object storage, file storage, RAID, those types of things. So that's going to be your technical knowledge. Now, that's your scientific foundation for creating the technical part of the strategy for your job. So that's skill pillar one of technical skills. Now, let's talk about why you need business skills. You are hired to create a strategy to help that business get to its business goals. You're not there to configure stuff. We're not engineers. You're there to create a strategy to help that business get to its goals. And you won't be able to do that without having a strong understanding of business. So you need business skills, and that's why we teach these. So what does that mean? It means you're going to have to be able to understand a business's strategy and understand what it's going to take to get them there, because your architecture is going to need to support that. When we design an architecture, we're designing to enhance some flavor of the organization's business capabilities. And that means you have to understand business capability mapping, and you have to understand business architecture. Because if we don't modify the way people do their jobs, then adding technology doesn't going to help us in any way. We have to be able to build a return on investment model and build a business case, because we have to convince the executives to fund our architecture. It doesn't matter how good the architecture is if we can't get it funded. We have to understand finance, because we're going to have to prove that investing in our cloud architecture is a better investment than something else. And that means you need to understand finance. Now, what I want you to understand is our job as an architect is not like the engineer. The engineer is going to be judged by how smart they are and how good they are hands-on. Architects are not hands-on. We architects need to be able to lead an architecture team. So we're going to be judged by our leadership skills, as opposed to, realistically speaking, our skills as much. This is the outcome our architecture teams can create. Now, the next set of skills is executive skills. And the business skills help you map the business strategy and business goals to your technology architecture. Your executive skills are how you get it funded. Because the engineers don't say, Mike, you can have your $1 billion for your architecture. The C-suite and the board does. So as an architect, you got to go get that money, whether it's a security architect getting money for the security architecture, whether it's an enterprise architect or an AI architect. We've got to get the money to make the architecture possible. That means the architecture being funded, but it also means the people necessary to build it when we're done, because that doesn't happen free either. So you will need executive skills, because you're going to have to be able to advise the chief financial officer, the chief operating officer, the CEO, the board of directors. You will also have to know how to execute change across an organization. Meaning, if we're going to change the way people do their jobs because we have to implement some new security component of our architecture, how are we going to get people to accept it, change the way they do their jobs? You will have to have executive presence and relevance. Now, I've interviewed about 6,000 technology professionals in my life, and lack of executive presence and lack of executive relevance is probably the key reason they don't get hired as an architect, because you have to be able to walk in the room with the chief financial officer and show them what's in it for them from a business perspective to give you the money. That means you need executive presence, or you won't be taken seriously, as well as executive relevance. meaning you're talking about business things and finance things, as opposed to packets per second through a virtual machine or a network interface. You'll have to know how to influence others, because part of your job is going to be aligning stakeholders and other components all in the same direction. That's a big part of our job. And you'll have to know how to sell the architecture. Imagine you see an organization that's got gaping security holes, and you're going to need $50 million to fix it, which is not uncommon. If you don't have the sales skills to get it, you won't be able to convince the company to invest in that architecture, and they'll get hacked. And the biggest part of our job is actually stakeholder management, which is walking through the organization, understanding, say, what sales leadership needs, what accounting leadership needs, what finance leadership needs, what marketing leadership needs, what engineering leadership needs, so you can create a strategy that they all want. So that's your executive skills. And the last set of skills is communication skills. And communication skills are critical for the role, because we have to determine what to build, and we have to figure out how we're going to go to an executive that says we're looking to enhance EBITDA by 3%. And how do we translate that into something that the engineers actually know how to build, which is our job. So we'll have to know how to communicate like an architect. So that means knowing how to create the right kind of architectural artifacts, not for the sake of creating documents, but for the kind that's going to enhance communication or promote a decision. You have to learn how to write for executives, for example, and what they actually need. You'll have to know how to ask the right questions, and have to know how to tell a story and give a presentation. And here's how critical presentation skills are for the architect. Whether it's a cloud architect or a cloud solutions architect or an enterprise architect, at the end of the day, realistically speaking, your last interview for an architect job is going to be a presentation. So make sure you've got good, strong presentation skills. Those are the skills for the architect to be able to create your architecture, align it to the business goals, get your architecture funded, and be able to lead the team of experts who's going to make that architecture what you need it to be. What a great, great, great question. Is the cloud architect role an entry role? So it's an interesting question you say that. And I'll answer that having gotten many people their first tech job as a cloud architect or an enterprise architect or a security architect. Here's what entry level really means. Someone doesn't have any skills for any job, so they get an entry level job, and hopefully on the job they learn things. Now, in my youth, I practiced internal medicine. Internal medicine is an entry-level job. As soon as you're done medical school and your residency, you practice internal medicine. That's entry level. A pharmacist whose decisions can affect life or death every day, their first job is a pharmacist. An attorney's first job is as an attorney. So your skills will determine what's your first entry-level job. Now, I have had people that, like Harsha, that have had 10 years of cloud engineering experience come to me, and about a year later, maybe a little more than a year later, he's working as a cloud architect. But at the same time, I've had Wallace Agana come to me, who was never in a tech job in his life. He was a sales rep, spent about the same year with me, and he's over at JP Morgan Chase as an enterprise architect. I will tell you that Balwinder came to me as a stay-at-home mom, but went straight over to Microsoft as a cloud solutions architect. I will tell you that Al, again, sales rep, not from the tech industry, came to me, went over to Deloitte after we trained him, and his first job was a senior solutions architect, and now he's in a much bigger architect role over at Microsoft. I can tell you that Ivan and Jordan, two good friends that were in Atlanta, Georgia, that were in college together, came to me and got their first tech jobs as a cloud solutions architect over at AWS. So the answer is you can get it as your first job. And I have students do it all the time. Had to fool me in the UK, got his first job as a chief technology officer, and that was his first tech job that are out there. I had Jeffrey, who was a geospatial imaging, go to Kellyan as his first architect job. I've even had Daniel, a 20-year-old, get hired by JP Morgan Chase, and he didn't have a high school diploma, but he had extremely good skills. He was extremely smart, knew how to market himself, and there's a video of him on our YouTube channel. So the answer is it can be your first role if you develop the right skills. But if you don't have the right skills, no matter how many years, it's not going to be there. And I have people that have interviewed with me for architect roles that have had 20 years experience that had no knowledge on how to be an architect whatsoever, because they learned engineering versus architecture. And I've had other people, well, like Camille, who was a student of ours, who's a nurse practitioner, who's now a director of architecture, cloud architecture. So it's about learning the right skills. Learn the right skills, you'll get a job. There's a shortage of us out there as architects. There's lots of people that have passed certifications, but passing a certification has nothing to do with knowing how to design an architecture. So it can be your first role, but your skill level, your brand strategy, being exactly what hiring managers want, knowing how to interview, knowing how to sell yourself, knowing how to position yourself, that's the secret to getting it to be your first job. And as it stands tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a webinar on how to become an enterprise architect. Feel free to join that webinar, and you can ask me any questions about cloud architecture live. It's on Zoom. It's free. I'll make sure my team drops that in the chat box. And I hope to meet you. And I welcome you to this career if it's something you want. This is honestly the best job I've ever had. I've had a lot of jobs. In my youth, I was a firefighter paramedic for 7 years. That's how I paid for college, because I didn't have any money to do it otherwise. Then I became an ER nurse for a short period of time. Then I became a nurse practitioner, practiced internal medicine. And then I went into architecture 26 years ago, and it was the best thing I've ever done, and I've loved every minute of it. So welcome to this career if that's what you desire. Great questions. So if you're having a good time, maybe give it a like, maybe give it a subscribe to the channel. If you've got a question, please drop it in the chat box. I want to do anything we can to truly help you in your career. I remember what it was like for me leaving healthcare for tech. And I remember as soon as I got some guidance, everything fell into place. So don't be shy. Okay, let's get to the next question. What's the difference between a cloud architect, a solutions architect, and an enterprise architect? Actually, there's a pretty significant difference. And it's really related to our focus, our scope of work, and where we actually work. So I'm going to start off with the 3 categories of architects. I actually have some slides for this that were part of the same presentation that I just pulled up. So let me kind of bring them up. So I want you to look at all of these architectural roles as different focus. So let's look at the enterprise architect. Now, in the end of my career, I worked more as an enterprise architect and a chief enterprise architect. So this is what we focus on here. When we talk about enterprise architecture, we're really designing the strategy on how that enterprise will operate. We're architecting the enterprise, if you will. So what does that mean? We look at the business from a business perspective, and we look at the elements of the business. The elements of a business are the organization's employees, how the company operates, how people do their job, which is called the processes, and then the technology that it supports the company's capabilities, the company's business goals. So we enterprise architects focus on optimizing all elements of the business, making sure we have the right people, that our people have the right skill, that we bring in training necessary for the right skills as necessary. We look at how people do their jobs. We find the most efficient way for them to do their jobs. And then we re-architect part of the business and the way people do their jobs to be most efficient. And then we map it out to all the technology the organization needs. So that could be robotics, it could be AI, it could be networking, it could be security, it could be cloud. So what I hope you see right here is that is a huge scope. So when we work as enterprise architect, we are really strategy consultants who have got a little extra knowledge on technology. And that's why, enterprise architects, it's 80 to 100% business, very, very little tech. And when we need tech people and we need smart tech people, we're going to go to the people that are right next to us on the architecture ladder, the platform architects. Now, a platform architect is an architect that's focused on an entire platform. And I'll give you some example. I'll use the cloud platform architect. So a cloud architect, a real platform architect, is going to be focused on this. They're going to be focused on designing the cloud strategy, coordinating the adoption process, and focused on everything that could be construed as cloud. That means the organization has a Nutanix cloud or an OpenStack cloud for their high throughput workloads. That means the company is in 2 different cloud providers and some co-location facilities. And it's the cloud architect's job to design the strategy that's most efficient, best for the company across all of them. So again, I want you to think about this. We're focused on the data centers and all the compute, storage, whatever in the data centers. We're focused on multiple cloud providers. We're focused on big picture strategy. And that's why the cloud architect role is, again, a 75% business executive job. And it pays that too. Average cloud architect earns about $200,000 a year. I think it's 201 the last time we checked. But many earn far more than that, especially if they've got good business skills, good executive skills, and that. So that's the cloud architect. Again, big picture. So if we enterprise architects are focused on the strategy, and then we rely on network architects and cloud architects and security architects to focus on their areas of speciality, focused on the platform, well, who's our tech support? That brings us to the solutions architect. So we architects will then have another type of architect in our team called the solutions architect. Now, the solutions architect is a very entry-level job. It's typically the lowest paid of the bunch. It typically has the least respect of the bunch, but I'll tell you, some of these jobs are really, really fun, and I enjoyed several principal solutions architect jobs in my career. But the reason it's so entry-level, the reason it doesn't get the big respect from the executive teams is the solutions architects are focused on a single workload or a single project. So a solutions architect might be focused on a website on a cloud provider. The cloud architect is focused on the organization's 20,000 servers that are spread across 3 cloud providers, 10,000 containers, 3 petabytes of storage, 10 databases, all of it across everything. And then that enterprise architect is focused on the entire strategy for the organization. Hope that helped, because it's a really great question, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. They want to be an enterprise architect and train, into these things that like a solution architect work, which focuses more on the minutia than we enterprise architects that focus on the big picture and the strategy. And of course, we architects might still bring in the principal engineers to be part of our technical team anyway, because they're going to dive deep and down and dirty even more than the solutions architects. Great question. Back for more. If you've got some questions, please don't be shy. Bring them in. Andy, hi, Mike. Why the majority of enterprise architect roles you see on LinkedIn require a software development background and things like CI/CD? So, it's actually honestly comical. And I'm going to tell you why it is so comical. The reality is that the people that are posting the jobs that are usually there are not actually the people doing the hiring. So why does this happen? What happens is me, the hiring manager, I want to hire someone, and in a tech company or in most companies, I have to tell HR that I need to hire an enterprise architect. And then HR says, great, Mike, I'll take care of it. And HR writes a job description for an enterprise architect role. But there's only one problem. HR has no idea what an enterprise architect is, what an enterprise architect does in their job, the skills that an enterprise architect would need. So what do? They look through every other architect description they've ever seen on the internet inside of their organization, and they synthesize it into this one job description that has all this ridiculous nonsense. And then that gets copied and pasted and pasted and pasted and pasted and pasted. So that's the majority of the reason why you see this. The other thing that you also have to note is we architects often are biased to what we know. So I know many people that will not hire a cloud architect unless they have a strong infrastructure knowledge. I mean, really strong infrastructure knowledge. Now, who are those people? They came from network architecture backgrounds and infrastructure architect backgrounds, because to them, the center of the universe is infrastructure, because if your infrastructure doesn't work, then there's nothing. Now, to be fair, infrastructure people are paid very well, Andy, but there's very few of them because it's super complex. So infrastructure people that are biased towards infrastructure are going to be smaller in number than anybody that came from an application background in their youth. Let's be fair. Since I was a kid, everybody said, learn to code, learn to code, learn to code. Now, I knew that was probably the worst thing I ever could have done because everybody was told learn to code. So I like to go in the opposite direction that everybody goes, because if everybody's running in one place, it's in the wrong place, you're in the wrong, you become a commodity and you're definitely in the wrong part of a supply and demand curve, which I didn't want to be, though I love people that can code. But so many people came from a software development background that had now found new roles. And some of them are like, well, I like people from a software development background, just like networking people like people from a networking background, and security people that have a security architecture background that are now in a big role. Well, they're worried about anybody that doesn't know security. So it's just bias. It's just why bias where people came from is part of it. But the other side of it is the job description thing is just crazy. Andy, when I first saw my first tech job description 26 years ago, when I was practicing internal medicine as a nurse practitioner, and I looked at a job description for a network engineering job, and it had Linux on it. It had Unix on it. It had expect and TCL scripting on it. It had all of these things on it. Not only did it have that, it had all these tools like HP OpenView and all these network management things. And then it had all these little sniffer tools and all these other things. And I looked at that job description and I went, what the heck is this? Then I applied for the job anyway. And when I got to the job, not only did they not ask me any single questions on any of those things, none of the things that were in the job description had anything to do with the job. And that's when I first learned, don't worry about what's in the job description. Now, worry about what the actual job is. So, Andy, my recommendation is get your business acumen good, get your leadership good, get your executive presence good. And I know you're focusing on these things. Get your technical knowledge good, and then present yourself the right way. Because the reality is the person that wrote that job description often has no idea what there's even in the job description. And that's why what happens, and it's so bad, Andy, here's why I've done 6,000 interviews in my life. Because what happens is HR makes a ridiculous job description. Then they send that job description to us. Or no, they put those job descriptions out there. Then candidates that match the job description come to us, and then we interview them. And because the job description had 50 different people's jobs, and the person tried to learn 50 different people's jobs, what they actually learned was not enough to do anyone's job. And ultimately, we go to another recruiting firm to bypass the actual internal people so we can find someone that knows what an enterprise architect is and how to find them. And that's usually where a lot of enterprise architect roles go. They go through like a Korn Ferry International or IT Excel or some other firms focused on it. Great question, Andy. Please feel free to ask more. Good question. What is the difference between a cloud consultant and a cloud architect? You're a new student with a data center background and want to become an architect. So I don't know I don't know what your current skill level is to say that you could become a cloud architect inside of 6 months. It might take you 6 months, might take you 12 months, might take you 18 months. There's a lot to learn, but you can definitely do it. I have had students that were taught exactly the right things that have become cloud architects in 6 months. But a cloud consultant could be anything. In fact, the word consultant is a horrible term that gets thrown around. Consultant could mean you don't have steady work. I'm not saying it does, but sometimes it's been thrown around to do that. Sometimes consultant means you're doing management and strategy consulting, which is business architecture consulting. Sometimes cloud consultant means very much the same job as an architect, where you're going to look at an organization, evaluate what their organization's needs are, and then create a strategy for them. So consultant is a meaningless term. Now, a cloud architect, I can tell you exactly what that person, and that is the person that creates the cloud strategy. That is the person that coordinates the adoption process. That is the person that plans the migration from that current state, what they have now, to the target state. That is the person that aligns various stakeholders, various executives, what have you. That is the person that gets the architecture funded by going to the CEO and the board of directors and getting the money. And that is the person that might be creating RFPs or responding to RFPs. So the answer is those are the skills that you need to do. And that is what a cloud architect does. So I'm going to do two things. Tomorrow, I'm going to have an enterprise architect webinar, and I want to invite you to that because that'll give you a better picture of what the architect is. Now, if you have a data center background, awesome. If you understand storage area networks like block storage, object storage, file storage, and how they work, awesome. If you understand CPU architecture and the types of CPUs that exist, and when your compute workload would go on a CPU versus a GPU versus a RISC-based processor like an ARM-based thing, you're even in better shape. If you understand from the data center, what routers do, what switches do, how are they fit together, how do those routing protocols work? And again, it's good. And if you don't understand that, guess what? You'll learn it. And it's really no big deal. So that's the real difference. Consulting could be anything. It's kind of like the term solutions architect. That can be thrown around to mean anything. I mean, some carpet stores have solutions architects that pick out the carpeting for your house. Some people that used to sell phones at phone stores were called solutions architects, or a solution architect could mean what it truly means, like designing a solution for a particular workload or project like it usually does. So hope that helps. Please feel free to ask a different kind of question or more detailed question, and I'd love to answer more. Hi, you are a DevOps engineer looking to shift into architecture. Could I please advise you on the best books to fill in your security and networking from fundamental levels? So here's what I want you to say. If you're a DevOps engineer and the first thing you're asking for is which tech skills to learn, we need to change your focus of thinking. Because the biggest reason people don't get hired for cloud architect jobs or enterprise architect jobs or security architect jobs is they don't have sufficient business knowledge. They don't have sufficient executive presence. They don't have sufficient communication skills. So this is what hiring managers want and what a hiring manager evaluation is. And then I'm going to give you two videos that are going to give you the best business books that'll help get you started, as well as the best technical books that will help you get started for, say, a cloud architecture role. Chris from my team will be dropping those into the link. It may take him a minute or two to find them. But what I really want you to understand is the role is very different than an engineering role. That's the key thing. So the first thing you're going to need is business skills. And the reason you're going to need business skills is because as an architect, you're going to have to be walking into a client's organization, learning about their business, learning how the business operates, learning where the challenges and pain points and are inside that business, understanding what an organization's business capabilities need to be, and figure that out first. The next part is determining how that company operates and working with the stakeholders across that organization to see what they actually need. The third at that point is to evaluate their current network, current data, current application architecture, current technology architecture, understand what they have and see how that's going to get them to their goals. At that point, we create a team. We lead that actual architecture team to design the strategy. Then we build a migration plan, create a governance structure. So an architecture engagement almost looks like this. So first, determine where we're going. We meet with the executive sponsors. We determine the vision, the scope, who the key players are. Then we determine, as I mentioned earlier, how does that business operate? Who's in charge? How do people do their jobs? What capabilities does the organization need? And then how does that organization make money? Then we baseline the organization. We look at everything they have from a data application technology architecture perspective. And then with our architecture team, we design the future state, which is what it needs to be. At that point, we have to go back to the stakeholders, get their buy-in, their feedback, and then we go back to our architecture team and we tune it. Now, as soon as it gets to the point where it's time to create the solutions architecture, this is where we're going to call AWS, Azure, Google, what have you. And our cloud architects are going to talk to their solutions architects, and they're going to make the recommendations of which products and services they'd like us to use. At that point, we're going to plan the migration, which is, how long is it going to take to get there? How many people do we need? What is the skill set of the people that we actually need? Do we go in phases? And of course, we have to create a governance structure, or who will govern the implementation when a change needs to occur. Who's going to test that change and assess that change and its impact on the organization? Who's going to look at the arc when technology needs to change? How will that actually change? So, that's what we do in our job. So, Chris from my team dropped the 10 best business books and 10 best technology books that'll help you. But since you're already coming from a DevOps perspective, if you dive deeper in the technology without getting the business, it won't serve you well. So I kind of hope that helps you. Please, and if you want, join me on the webinar tomorrow and ask me questions live on Zoom. I really want to become a cloud architect. You have started doing a cloud storage platform. What should my end goal be as a solutions architect or cloud architect? So, Carabo, what do you mean by doing? If by doing you mean you're configuring things or clicking things in the management console, that's not going to help you get to the goal. And here's the reason. So, a cloud admin configures the things on the management console, the kind of stuff they teach in an AWS Solutions Architect certification. The click, 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 that's administration work. That's not architecture. The cloud architect doesn't touch the technology in their job. We don't build anything. We don't touch Linux. We don't touch Python. We don't code. We don't touch the technology. What we do is we go into an organization. We meet with their executives. We determine what their business pain points are, what their business goals are, what their business challenges are, what the regulatory environment is, what their competitors are doing. And at that point, we look at what kind of technologies they have, and we look at what kind of technologies will get them to their goals. And then we create a strategy around that. And then we document it. We have to get funding for it, which means building business cases for it and presenting to the executive team. So if you want to become a cloud architect, the first thing I want you to do is attend our How to Become an Architect webinar. Then I want you to focus on architecture skills. So instead of learning how to configure block storage, because honestly, you don't need to know. You do need to understand block storage. How does block storage work? Where is the inherent strength and weaknesses in block storage? How does block storage compare to the performance of, say, in-server storage? Given that in-server storage is typically much faster than block storage, what are our workarounds around latency and throughput with block storage, like RAID or something like that, for example? So it's a different set of skill. For the architects, you have to learn how the stuff works, how the stuff fits together. For the engineer, they need to know which boxes to click. So it's a very different set of skills. So I'm going to invite you to join me tomorrow. But remember, you have to learn the technology. If all you do is learn an AWS certification, you'll learn how to configure an EC2 instance, which you won't do in an architect job. What you do need to learn is you need to learn the server, and you need to learn the virtual machine and understand how the hypervisors work and understand what kind of processor you should select with a higher clock speed or more cores, when you should use a RISC-based CPU versus a CISC-based CPU, when your compute should be on there. So it's learning a different set of things. Don't learn how to configure it. Don't waste your time learning vocabulary names like EC2. Go out there and learn the technology, learn how the technology works, learn how its strengths, learn the technology's weaknesses, learn how one technology will solve a problem, and you will be well on your way to an ultra high paying architect career. I mean, if you'd like to train with us, we'd love to train you, but that's the key. It's understanding the tech at that level, because it's a different level. It's the difference between the technician and the planner. And, if you look at it, if you really look at an architect, for example, if you've ever seen the Burj Al Arab, even on TV or on the internet, it's the most beautiful hotel I've ever been to. Now, the architect designed it, or the team of architects designed it, and construction workers put it together. At one point I went to this place called Mall of America, and it was this mall that was like 2 kilometers long. I mean, this thing was incredible. Now, the architects designed it. The construction people built it. Now, the architects that designed the architecture needed to understand things about building materials and strengths of building materials and laws about water that you could get in and out and how you would get your electricity in and out of the systems and where your golf course would be and where your pool is going to be and what your landscaping should look like. That's architecture. So hopefully you join me on the webinar tomorrow. Please feel free to ask as many more questions as you like, and I really appreciate the question. If you've got questions, please bring them in. If you're having a good time, maybe hit the like button. Maybe tell a friend to come, because we want to do anything we can to help others. Maybe subscribe to the channel. You're studying current AWS and currently have your CCP, and you're going to take your AWS Solutions Architect Associate next week. You're looking to get your first job in cloud. Coming from a sales manager position, what should you look for? So there's a huge difference between what's covered in an AWS certification and what the actual job is. Could you tell me what job you want? Because if you tell me which job you want, I can tell you exactly what you need to learn. Because the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, they're not enough for any job. And here's the reason why. They're the name of an AWS thing. They're how to configure it, but they don't tell you how it works. They don't tell you where the strengths and weaknesses are. They don't tell you when you should or shouldn't use them. They don't tell you what the alternatives are. So the only thing they teach you to do is how to click stuff. Now, from a hiring perspective, I don't need anybody that knows how to click stuff if they don't know what they're clicking and what the implications are of what they're clicking, which is exactly the missing component of the AWS Solutions Architect and Solutions Architect Professional. So tell me the job that you want. Now, if you said you wanted to be a cloud engineer, I'd say very simple. I'll tell you exactly what to do. So now, if you tell me to be a cloud architect, I'll tell you exactly what you need to do. First, come to the class tomorrow, because quite frankly, it's going to take you the same amount of training time from where you're at with a Solution Architect Associate. It'll take you a good year to develop the skills to be a cloud engineer, and it'll take you 8 months to a year to develop the skills to be a cloud architect as your first job. Because the job of an admin, the click, click, click boxes people, we don't need them anymore. We haven't really needed them for years, because one DevOps engineer can write an infrastructure as code script, effectively replacing 100 of those people in a minute. And that's before so if you want to become a cloud architect, here's the first thing that you need to learn. 4 sets of skills. The first are technical. Now, you have to understand, what is the cloud? How is the cloud built? How will the cloud fail? What is the underlying infrastructure that makes the cloud? And what is the data center? And here's the reason you need that. So much of what we do as cloud architects is take the things from the data centers to the cloud. Take a virtual machine from the data center, move it to a virtual machine in the cloud. But if you don't understand what a virtual machine is, you won't be able to move it. A lot of what we do is we take data center systems and redesign them to be more cloud friendly. But if you don't know what it is, what you have, you won't know whether it makes sense to make it cloud friendly or not. So the first component is the underlying infrastructure. So I'll explain to you what that underlying infrastructure is, and I'll tell you why. So the underlying things that you need to understand are AI. What goes into AI, how our models train, how do you prevent AI type of challenges, basic knowledge of AI, because every architecture has AI. And quite frankly, I've been working with AI since 2001. David Lithicum, who's our chief AI instructor, has been working with AI since 1985. So you have to understand AI, not how to configure it, not how to write Python code, but what are the elements of an AI system. Now, you definitely have to understand applications. So what do I mean by that? You need to know when an ERP system will help the business versus a CRM system. When would a unified communication system work like that? And most of these business applications won't be made by Amazon. So you're going to have to understand what businesses actually use. Same thing for compute. You're going to have to understand that infrastructure. When do I use a virtual machine? When do I use a container? When do I host it in a public cloud like AWS? And when should I never host it in a public cloud because it's going to cost me 10 times more? When do I use application virtualization? When do I use function as a service? That's the knowledge you need to understand. Same thing with data. I don't need you to know how to configure an AWS database because you won't be doing it ever as an architect. It's not part of your job. But I need you to know when you can't use an AWS database and when you should choose something otherwise. I need you to know how you're going to have your databases work on 3 clouds at the same time. I need you to understand, when to use a relational database versus a NoSQL database versus a data warehouse. When are graph and vector databases coming into the play for this environment? How and where is a data pipeline? And that's the kind of stuff that's architecture stuff. And that's the stuff that's all missing from the AWS certification. You have to be able to understand how to look at a business and how to determine how much downtime is costing that business, to calculate maximum tolerable downtime, to figure out how to plan around disaster recovery. You have to understand IAM, and quite frankly, you're not going to be using AWS IAM in any real environment. You're going to be working with Okta or Active Directory or a combination of them. You're going to be using context-aware IAM and Zero Trust. You're going to be using FIDO tokens and things like that, none of which are AWS things. So you're going to have to understand all of IAM, heavy-duty federated IAM type things. And, after that, then you need to learn networking. How does your network work? For example, where do you use a router? Where do you use a switch? What is your wide area network chosen and designed of? And the same thing. So that's the technical skills. Now, quite frankly, we teach those right now. And, me and David Lethingham, we're the only people teaching architecture right now. But it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that if you would get a Cisco Certified Internet Expert certification, which is where I started, they didn't just teach you how to configure the routers. It was how did the routing protocols work? Where do the routing protocols break? It was how does this stuff work, not just how to build it. So that's the tech skills. Now, the rest of it is business skills. And that's why I created this program. I created the program because you need a lot of business skills for the job. You need a lot of executive skills for the job. And what I did is I went to business school, got an MBA to learn the business school, took leadership training, took sales training, took presentation skills training, got executive presence training. So that's why I teach all of these skills. But those are the other set of skills you're going to need, because we don't do any of those hands-on things like in an AWS certification, but we have to be able to design something for the organization's business strategy, which means understanding the way the organization operates, the business architecture, understanding their capabilities. We've got to create a business case to get our architecture funded. We manage vendors, because if you did 10 AWS certifications, you would think that everything's in AWS. Here's the reality. You get to an enterprise, they're on 3 clouds. They've got multiple data centers. They've got 200 different applications. They've got 50, 75, 100 different vendors. So you have to know how to deal with that. And that's what's missing. So that's why we teach what we teach. At the same time, you're going to be advising the board, the directors. Here's why you shouldn't migrate from this data center to the cloud. Here's what it's going to cost you. Here's how it's going to help with your business agility. Here's how it's going to help you free up capital resources to invest in other things, which means speaking at the executive level. And then the last part of it is more on the communication side, because we don't build anything. We're not engineers. So knowing how to configure an EC2 instance or an S3 bucket doesn't really help us. But we do need to how to create the right kind of an architecture artifact to convince the C-suite to fund our architecture. We do know how to give a presentation, which will be the last interview for an architect role. You do need to be able to tell a story about how a client that invested in XYZ architecture either increased their revenue or decreased their operating expense or better adhered to regulatory environments, those types of things. So hope that helps. Please feel free to join me in the architecture webinar. It is the best career in the world. And the reason the architecture career is the best kept secret in the world, the reason the average security architect earns $231,000 a year, the reason many enterprise architects and chief architects go to $500,000 or more a year is because of that rare business set of skills. Because there's millions and millions of certified people that know how to click the boxes. But when you get these skills I'm talking about, you'll be one of the rare few. And you'll be able to do incredible things. So I don't know that there's really any more of an entry-level role. So here's what I mean by this. 20 years ago, well, actually, I've never had an entry-level role in my life, but even in tech, the first role that I got was a senior network engineer. Somebody told me to be a network admin. Someone told me to be this. I took a job as a senior network engineer for 3 months. It was at MCI WorldCom, the world's largest ISP. At the time, they're now Verizon. And when I went into that, they hired me as a senior network engineer, and they realized in about a month that I was no engineer, and they promoted me to be lead architect. And that was my first job. Within a year, I was on Wall Street as a senior network architect. And a year later, I was at Comcast as a principal network architect designing, the network backbone. And that's the key, that's where I started. Now, I know other people that have started, at help desk and done help desk for 10 years. And then after 10 years of help desk, got an admin job, did that for 5 years, then invested in training and got an engineering job for a few years, then invested in architecture training and then moved into an architect job. But the problem is architecture doesn't look like engineering. Architecture doesn't look like sysadmin, which is why I have people that come to me with 10 years of cloud engineering experience that after a year or so become a cloud architect. But at the same time, I've got waiters and waitresses that come to me and are hired as an architect in a year, or sales reps who get hired, like Jermaine, hired in less than that time because he had good ability to present himself, had a lot of business acumen, had a lot of executive presence, could build the business case. So you're going to get there. You just have to learn the right set of skills. Just certification is not the same as hireable skills. I wish the certification providers would say that. I really wish they did, but they don't. But I'll give you the full set of skills and tell you exactly why, how to get hiring managers to come to you, what needs to be on your resume, those kinds of things. Talk about it all tomorrow on the webinar. And it's free. And please, come off mute. Ask me questions. Anything we can do to build your career. What certificates do I recommend to get your foot in cloud? So, Zay, could you tell me what your role is? Because there are some certificates that I might use for cloud security. There are different certificates that I would use for cloud networking. There are different certificates that I would use for a cloud architect. There are different certificates and things that you would use for a cloud DevOps engineer. So if you tell me the goal career, then we can talk about the certifications that are going to improve your branding, which are going to make you look good. But what I want you to understand is no certification out there will ever get you a job. None. Certifications will get you interviews. The right skills, the right things are what get you hired. So here's generally the way I recommend it. And here's how my flow of how I train people. And with it, our students follow this. But now that you said cloud networking, I'll know a little more. The first thing, my system had been, which is why we got our students hired under their background. First phase is develop the right skills. Start here. And Chris, we have a video on how to become a cloud architect. Please pop that in the chat box because a lot of people, I think it'll help so many people here. The next thing to really focus on is being what the hiring manager wants, because 89% of people are not hired because they don't have the attributes what hiring managers want. I'll talk about that on the webinar tomorrow. The third thing you want to do is build an architect portfolio that has architecture stuff in it that proves to the hiring manager you can do the job. Because at this point, you've got good skills. Then here, you start getting certifications and they get you more interviews. They don't teach you how to do the job. They get you more interviews. You tune your resume, you tune your LinkedIn profile, and then you go on the interview and you win it and you get some interview training. So that's the process to actually do this. And that's the reason why I say this. Now, cloud networking. So if you wanted to get into a cloud networking environment, the first thing that you need to understand is networking. Now, in today's world, there are some jobs like architects that can't be replaced by AI. So if anybody's listened to this conversation today, they've noticed that I talked about meeting with stakeholders, giving presentations, selling things to the board, managing stakeholders, managing vendors. That's all human to human work. That can't be replaced by AI. So now, after considering the impact of AI on engineering, here's the minimum level of networking knowledge that I would recommend and certifications to get a job in cloud. The Cisco Certified Internet Expert, if you wanted to do cloud networking, and the AWS Solutions Architect Professional. That will get you there. And here's the reason. The CCIE is not like any other certification in the world. In the process of spending the $10,000 to $15,000 to pass it, maybe 20, the level of depth that you'll have to read, the 40 or 50,000 pages of deep technical knowledge, will give you your networking and data center foundations from a technical perspective. And the AWS certification will teach you the names that AWS calls you, the stuff that you probably learned from Cisco for the CCIE. So Cisco will teach you what it is. And those two, that might be enough if you're talking about a certification perspective. Now, if you told me something different, if you said, I want to be a cloud architect, I'm going to tell you it's probably a less intense path because it's more business things, more soft things. But cloud networking is pretty heavy. So here's why I say the CCIE. Because AI is better than a CCNA. Quite frankly, AI is better than 95% of the CCNPs that I've actually hired. So for people that are truly focused on cloud networking, I love to start them with the CCNA to really understand, what's in an IP packet, what's in a header, how does routing work, how does switching work. But then the CCIE becomes my fundamental knowledge now for networking after the impact of AI. Prior to AI, a CCNA with really deep knowledge that had really deep knowledge into data centers and other technologies was good enough. But not now. Because if you're looking at a technical job and a cloud networking person is super technical, now you're in a skill where you have to be better than AI. And that means the CCIE is honestly the intro. And to be fair, Zay, when I started my networking career, I'm going to make it very clear. I became an MCSE, which was the stupidest thing I could have done. I spent $5,000 on a boot camp. I was advised by a local computer school to do that. I was a Microsoft certified systems engineer. Nobody cared. I was told by that school, Mike, you need a CCNP to get a networking job. So I locked myself in a room, passed the CCNA on my own, spent $11,000 on a 10-day boot camp to pass the CCNP. Nobody cared, not a single person. Called another school and they said, Mike, what you really need to do is you need to get certified in design. And Cisco had the Cisco Certified Design Associate, which I took on my own. I took another expensive boot camp for the Cisco Certified Design Professional. Then I started applying for jobs, and this is 26 years ago, and everybody rejected me. Now, at that point, what I did was something different. I'm not the kind of person that gets knocked down and doesn't get back up. I'll get back up and get back up, get back up. So what I said is maybe my strategy is wrong. I'm not taking another certification. So I started calling recruiters. I called 50 recruiters in each state, but spent much attention to the recruiters in San Jose, California, because Cisco was headquartered there and everybody else was at the same time. I asked them instead. I said, I've got all these certifications. Nobody's going to hire me. And the recruiter said, of course not, Mike. Employers don't hire certifications. They hire skills. They hire attitude. They hire competency. They hire confidence. They hire trust. And I said, so what do I do? And they told me exactly what hiring managers wanted. They told me the kind of skills that they wanted. They also said whether you pass the CCI or not is not the issue, but you need those levels of skills. So I learned those levels of skills, went on my first job, was immediately hired as a senior engineer. 3 months later, I was promoted to lead architect. A year later, I was a senior architect. And a year after that, I was a principal architect. But none of it came from the certifications. None of it. So I recommend you get the skills. And then after you have the skills, get whatever certifications will get you an interview. So that could be a CCNP can get you an interview. You might get lucky with the CCNA to get you an interview. Because if you're using the certifications as an interview bait, then it really doesn't matter. The CCNP is great. The CCNA can almost suffice. An AWS Solutions Architect professional will get you interviews. Just realize they won't teach you how to be the architect or the engineer. Do that elsewhere, and you'll be great. Great questions. Please feel free to ask more. What is the difference between an infrastructure architect and a cloud architect? In some companies, none. In other companies, it can be different. So some companies view it all as infrastructure. The network's infrastructure, the storage is infrastructure, my Nutanix is infrastructure, my VMware is infrastructure, my routers, my switches, my servers, that's all infrastructure. And to those folks, an infrastructure architect and a cloud architect is the same, because what is cloud computing? A virtual version of the stuff we used to have in the data center for the last 20 years, albeit slightly more expensive, typically higher latency, but for the most part, the same thing we have in a more agile perspective. Now, other companies have it differently. Their infrastructure architects could be networking people, they could be storage people, they could be compute people in physical data centers. And then in the cloud, they have the cloud architect. Now, if you're talking about a cloud infrastructure architect and an infrastructure architect, not a cloud architect, they effectively are the same thing. Because if we're focused on infrastructure, it doesn't matter whether it's physical infrastructure, like a bare metal server in our data center, or a bare metal server that we run in the cloud because we need direct access to the hardware for our particular application, or a VMware server that we're running inside of our system, or a VMware server that we're running on Azure so that our team doesn't have to learn AWS stuff. So in many cases, they're very similar, but in some companies, cloud, usually when you hear cloud, you also think a little bit of application architecture. You usually think about more of the security. You think about it all from the big role, which means ultimately the cloud architect becomes a generalist role, similar but to an enterprise architect, but more focused on technology, where they've got a security architect and a storage architect and a big data architect and an AI architect and an infrastructure architect all working for them. Great question. You're coming from a Cisco routing environment. So did I. Great background. How do you begin the cloud path? Could you tell me which cloud path? As soon as you tell me which cloud path, I will be happy to give you that path. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like going to an airport. You know, the airport can take you to Athens, Greece, which is kind of like where I'm from, very close to that, real beautiful place. It could take you to Dubai, which is another great place. It could take you to London, which can be a really fun place. It could take you to Nepal, which is a place I've always wanted to go. Or it can take you to Panama, which is another great place. So I just need to know where you want to go. So let me know where you want to go, because it's going to be different if it's networking or security or AI or architecture versus engineering. So just let me know. You were under the impression that you had to be a cloud engineer before becoming an architect. Is that not true? You have 9 years of high-end dealership exposure. How can you transition? So here's the thing. You don't need to be a cloud engineer to be a cloud architect any more than you need to go to school to become a registered nurse before you can then go to medical school to be a surgeon. Now, you could work as a nurse for 10 years and then go to medical school after those 10 years, but you'll still need to do the thing. Here's the reality. Cloud engineering and cloud architecture are two different jobs. Now, I know many people that have been engineers for a while, have moved into architecture jobs. Many of them were people like me. I did 3 months in engineering. Then I got an MBA. Then I got an executive coach. Then I got leadership skills and I got sales training. And the next thing I realized, I'm in major heavy duty architect roles, way above where I should have been. I was a principal architect in 2 years. Many people never get there in 20. So what you need to be able to do is to do the job. Now, a big part of the job is sales. And some of the fastest people I've ever trained had a sales background. But I want you to understand why. And I also want you to understand why engineering, and I'm going to show you, isn't always the best background. Here, let me show you this. So if you look at this slide, here's your matrix of skills. And I'm going to show you why Wallace Agana came to me and went straight into an enterprise architect role. Jermaine, same thing. First job was an enterprise architect role. Skip the cloud architect role and ran to an even more senior role. And I'm going to show you why engineering typically doesn't help. So let's say you've got but if you've got an engineering background, we can still use it, we can work with it, and we can make it help. It's just how you do it. So let's say I have someone that's a programmer. They've been a programmer for 10 years. They know applications. Now, what they won't know is networking, disaster recovery, storage, security, compute, AI, IAM, or data. They will know applications, and they will know it real well. They also won't have any CXO relevance. They won't know how to manage stakeholders. They may or may not be emotionally intelligent. They'll have no idea how to write for the C-suite. They'll have no idea how to get $1 billion architecture managed. They'll have no idea how to negotiate between the 200 vendors and the client. They typically won't know how to answer the right questions, how to influence others, how to negotiate a deal, how to actually change the organization's culture necessary for your new architecture. And they probably, unless they've had an executive coach, won't be able to walk into a room. And that's why it really doesn't matter. But let's look at Wallace. He was a sales rep. He knew how to influence others. He knew how to ask the right questions. He knew how to sell. He knew how to write for executives. He's highly emotionally intelligent, knew how to manage stakeholders from his sales job. He had strong business knowledge, and we made it better. He knew how to negotiate from his sales background. He had lots of executive presence, but we made it better. We tuned his executive communication, and we optimized his presentation skills. Before he even came to me, he had half of the skills of an enterprise architect. And then we only needed to teach him here. So it doesn't matter where you come from. If you know networking, awesome. We'll take the networking, and then we'll learn the rest of the stuff. If you know data, great. We'll take the data and work in the rest of it. So it doesn't matter where you're at. And that's why it really doesn't matter. But no, engineering doesn't need to be your first job. No, there are some managers that like to hire people with an engineering background. There are other managers that just don't care. So I hope that answers your question. And it's a great question you asked. What are the specific areas you need to concentrate on to be an architect? So first thing I want you to understand, the only thing a certification will do for an architect is get you an interview. But I've interviewed 6,000 people that had many, many, many certifications. I've hired less than 25. I've interviewed 1,000 people that were AWS certified, and most of them didn't even know what a virtual machine was, or anything about networking, or honestly anything about anything other than how to click the boxes. And so it's about being able to do the job. So what areas do you need to concentrate on? Technical skills, business skills, communication skills, and executive skills. 75% of the job, not your technical skills. And if we look at what we do as architects, and I'll walk you through a quick architecture engagement I did a little earlier, and I'll show you where your skills from each category will come in. The first part of our job is determining where the company wants to go. Now that means we meet with the client's executives, usually an executive sponsor. We determine the vision of what they're trying to achieve. For example, maybe they're trying to reduce medical errors in a hospital. Then we determine what's in scope. Is it just the emergency department, or is it the whole hospital? We determine, the criticality of these systems. How much does it cost per minute of downtime? Maybe we're losing a minute of downtime, and we need $1 million a minute of downtime. So we have to identify that. And then we have to figure out who the key stakeholders are. So here you're dealing with executive skills, you're dealing with stakeholder management skills, and you're dealing with business skills. Now, the next part of our job as an architect is to learn the business architecture or understand how that business operates. Now, at that point, what we're realistically talking about is the business architecture, the processes, the way people do their jobs. We're going to look at the organization's assets. We're going to look at their current data architecture. Who owns the data? How does data flow through the system? What are we doing to protect the data? We're going to look at the application architecture, which is what are the applications that we have, for example? How do those applications actually work together, for example? We're going to be looking at the technology architecture that we actually have. What are the AI systems, our cloud systems, our data center systems? We're kind of figure that out. We're going to figure out where they're at. Then we're going to create an architecture team. And with that architecture team, we're going to create a new architecture. So if you really looked at where we came from, the first part of what we did was, where are we going? That's business skills and executive skills. Then we're working with the executives to understand how that organization operates. Business architecture. That means business skills, business acumen, financial acumen. Then we look at the current architecture they have. Now, I promise you, you're not going to have the networking skills of someone that works at Cisco for the last 25 years as they will, for example. And at the same time, the person, like I know Praveen, he's someone we trained. He's now a senior vice president over at JP Morgan Chase. He's got lots of experience with data. So he's going to know data better than I will. So he'll be the data architect, for example, on my team. And I'm going to have to lead a team of application architects. So this is your leadership skills over here to lead your architecture team. Because what we're ultimately going to be doing is looking at where they're at, which we're going to work with that team to map out. And then we're going to develop the future state of where we need to take them. So that's our job. That's the technical component of our job, of working with these teams, which we have to lead, which means leadership skills, to figure out what they have and then where we need to go. Now, we will ultimately have to present this architecture back to the key stakeholders, get their input, get their willingness to promote it and fund it, for example. And then after we get that, we're going to call in our solutions architects from the vendors to figure out which modules we use. I've got a firewall. I call Cisco and they recommend this firewall. I call Palo Alto and they recommend this one. That's the solutions architecture. Then we're going to plan the migration, which is how many people do we need? What skill level of people do we need? How many phases do we need to do? What kind of training is going to be necessary for the people? We develop the training. And then, of course, we set up a governance structure. How will changes occur when we need to make these changes? How will changes be assessed for their impact in the environment? Who's going to govern the implementation? So the job is a business job. So you have to learn the underlying technology, how the underlying technology works, and how it fits together, which is not the same as how to build it. It's a deeper level. But you also have to have the business skills to be able to understand the business, be able to build a business case to get your architecture funded, to be able to convince the C-suite and the board of directors to fund your architecture, which is why you need those skills. But I have a strong, long 1-hour presentation that will cover every skill tomorrow. Join me and we'll cover it. Great questions. If you've got questions, bring them in. We'll do what we can. You're currently enrolled in the AWS Restart program. You're very interested in cloud, eagerly waiting for the webinar. I'm thrilled to meet you. I've taken many people who have completed the AWS Restart program and then trained them to be great architects. Many people have come to me AWS certified. Others haven't. Really doesn't matter, but I'm really looking forward to meeting you. And it's on a webinar. We can talk face-to-face, come off mute, ask questions, anything we can do to help you. Look forward to meeting you tomorrow. Can you become a solutions architect first while doing the cloud architect program and then transitioning into a cloud architect role while still in the program? You're out of work right now. So the answer is possibly. So the reason I say possibly is I don't know your exact skill set. I don't know how much you know. I don't know how well you present yourself to give you a definitive answer. Now, tomorrow on the webinar, you come to that webinar, I'll ask you a few questions and be able to see what you know. And I'll be able to tell you that, look, you're fairly close to the solutions architect right now. And in our program, these are the gaps that you need to do, and you'll get there. Or I'll be able to say, well, to get to a solutions architect or a cloud architect job is probably going to take you the same amount of time based upon the skills that you have. Now, here's the reason I don't train solutions architects. Quite simply is this. If you have a better set of skills, it's easier to do it. So by training people for either these roles, and I'll show you why I do it. If I train you to be a platform architect, like a security architect, you can easily get a security solutions architect job because it's so basic compared to the knowledge you actually have. If I train you to be a cloud architect, you can almost always get a solutions architect job because these are so basic. And I mean, that's why we've got so many people. For example, Noah was a social worker before he became a solutions architect. Jennifer was a mental health worker before she got hired at JP Morgan Chase as a solutions architect. Richard was working at MUFG Bank in the fraud department before we got him his first solutions architect job. Coyote was a college student before AWS hired him as his first, or just got hired by AWS as a solutions architect. I don't know if she has any job other than her military service that she mentioned in the past. Pierre was a sailboat operator before LeaseWed hired him after our training. So the key is, if you train to be a cloud architect, you might just get a solutions architect job first, or you might get a cloud architect job first. So I'd say prepare for the better one. You can always take a step down. And that's generally the easier approach. It's like just having one extra level of armor on you, one extra level of protection, so you have more options. And if you are out of work, the key is getting the right skills as fast as possible, getting the right packaging as fast as possible, mastering your interview as fast as possible. And here's the reason why. A lot of what it takes to getting hired and rehired isn't exactly what most people think it is. They focus on their tech skills when maybe it was their interview technique. Maybe it wasn't their tech skills and it was more the soft skills, emotional intelligence, or something like that. So if you want, I'm happy to assess you tomorrow and I will tell you exactly what I think you need to do to get hired as fast as possible. And I'll tell you exactly what it's going to take to make you a great architect. Just don't be shy on the webinar. Raise your hand when the time is right, come off mute and we'll talk. Because the answer is yes, you could do this, but you might just become a cloud architect at the same time. It might be faster, or it might occur at the same time where both opportunities are there. And I just don't know where you're at to give you there. Because what it really comes to an architect job is looking at where you're at, what you have right now in terms of skills, and then looking at where you want to go, and then building you the plan. By the way, do you know what architecture is? Looking at the company where it is now, determining where the company wants to go, and building the plan to get there. You know why I learned architecture so easy? Do you know what the job of medicine is? Patient comes in with this problem. Your goal is to get patient healthy, and you build the plan to get here. So the only role that I know most that's most like the cloud architect, the enterprise architect, the security architect is actually the doctor role, the physician role, but and the management consultant role. But yes, you can do it, and I'm sure we can help you. But I'll be certain that we can help you, and I can tell you exactly what we can do and how fast when I can speak to you. And of course, if you want to book a call with our team, we're happy to do that. Someone from my team will speak to you. Maybe I'll speak to you. Lots of times I do. Chris from my team dropped a link in the chat box for people to book a call with us. But also, I'll look forward to meeting you on the webinar. Great question. Please feel free to bring more in. If you don't learn this from AWS, where can you learn it? Well, you'll definitely learn it with us, or you actually have to learn the infrastructure. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. So let's say you work on AWS and they have an EC2 instance. Well, an EC2 instance is a virtual machine. And sure, AWS will teach you how to configure it, but they won't tell you it's a virtual machine. Now, they use the term instance because nobody really knows that an instance. If I told you that that VMware in 1999 invented the virtual machine, then AWS's EC2 instance in 2026 doesn't sound so exciting. But if I call it Elastic Compute Cloud, nobody really realized that it was the basic virtual machine. So what you have to do is you have to look at every service that AWS creates, or Azure, or Google, and then get rid of the marketing names, get rid of all the configuration things because that's not relevant for you as an architect, and then learn the underlying technology. So when they teach you how to configure a VPC and they say, here's how you put a static route, for example, you need to learn what is routing, how do routers forward packets, how does ARP work, for example, how do routers work, what happens when a router has a route or doesn't have a route to a destination, where does it drop the traffic, how and where can we place a packet filter in space of our packet? What's inside of the headers of the IP packets? And if so, what can we do to do that? So it's learning the under stuff. So what AWS is missing is, and here's really what it is. Imagine you were going to train a doctor, Slim Season, and what you did is you brought the doctor a book that said, these are your 20 pills, and these are the dosages of the 20 pills. But you never trained the doctor into anatomy. You never trained the doctor into physiology. You never trained the doctor in pathology, which is the study of disease. You never taught the doctor how to examine a patient or make a diagnosis. And all you told them was, here's the name. This is the blue-yellow pill that's elastic. This is the cloud-based pill that's yellow. It wouldn't do you any benefit. So that's why doctors learn the underlying stuff first. They learn how the heart works. They know what the right ventricle versus the left ventricle versus the left atrium versus the right atrium versus the pulmonary arteries versus the pulmonary veins. They know what the ascending aorta does and the descending aorta, because you can't make a diagnosis without it. Same thing here. And that's why we do what we do, because we're not a certification provider. Sure, we'll teach you the certifications after we've taught you the cloud, but you got to learn the cloud. Now, if you realize that the cloud is nothing more than a data center, it's just a virtual version of the same thing. That means if you understand routers real well and switches real well, you know everything about the VPC plus 1,000 times more. That means if you understand processor architecture and storage architecture and DRAM architecture and GPU architecture and PCIe bus architecture on the server, you'll know every server and virtual machine that's out there. And that's the difference. So another way I can describe it is, here's what the AWS certification is. It's a vocabulary test. So if instead of teaching you how to drive, I said this was an elastic vector changer, and the gas pedal or the accelerator, I called an elastic accelerator decelerator potentiometer, and then the brakes, I called it an elastic speed upper and slower downer upper, you wouldn't know what it is. Now, if I taught you, here's a car, here's the steering wheel, here's the accelerator, here's the brake, here's the gear shift, here's how the engine works, here's what the cylinders do, you'd know all about the car. You could get in any car, whether you're in Abu Dhabi, whether you're in Delhi, whether you're in Cape Town, get in that car and drive it because you know the mechanics of the car. So I'm saying, learn the cloud. You can learn it with us. We'd love to teach you. And we'll teach you all those other skills. You don't have to get a $300,000 education like I did to get all the business and executive skills. And it'll just be a few days' pay for our average graduate. Or you'll now know what they are, the underlying data center. Know the data center, know the cloud. Great question. You have a systems analyst background and want to become a cloud architect. Is returning as a systems analyst while earning cloud certifications a good path to transition into cloud architecture? No. If you get cloud certifications, you will be a systems analyst with cloud certifications. You're still going to have to get the architect skills. You're still going to have to get the business skills to be able to understand a business's challenges, understand how the business operates, understand the business architecture, and understand how you can make that business better. You'll still need to be able to meet with executives, figure out what their priorities are, convince them to fund your architecture, and that's not going to be covered in a certification. You're going to have to know how to respond to an RFI or an RFP or an RFQ, how to write industry-shaping thought leadership, create a reference architecture, for example, be able to build a business case around your architectures, present those architectures and get funding for them. You're going to have to know how to create the governance structure, and none of that is actually going to be in there. So my recommendation is that you learn how to be an architect. And then when you know how to be an architect, get certifications, because here's why I've been using this method. And I've used this method for 20 years with people. And the reason is, when you get certifications, all that does is get you interviews. Nobody's getting hired from having an AWS Solutions Architect professional and a DevOps engineering professional, unless they're really lucky. All that means is you know the name of AWS stuff and how to configure a few tools. But we need people that can think, that can understand the implications of their actions. They understand what happens if they should have used something different that they didn't know about. So the first phase is learning how to do the job. Next phase is becoming what the hiring manager wants. And if you want to come tomorrow, I'll tell you what they want. But they want a certain set of things, and 89% of the people are not hired because they can't convince the hiring manager that. That means 9 out of 10 people don't get hired here. Now, the next set of people that don't get hired are the people that say, hey, I'm certified, but I can't prove to you that I can do the job. So that's where your portfolio is going to come in. See, all this is about being able to do the job, and all your certifications are about getting you more interviews. If you don't do these 3 things first, you're just going to be the one of the hundreds of thousands of people that have gotten cloud certifications that don't go anywhere. And that's why there's a couple of master's degrees programs in cloud computing that don't teach cloud computing, but the people come out with 20 certifications. The students come to me, I get them hired. It's why some people come to me with 10 certifications and I have to start them from scratch. And other people come to me with a healthcare background, and poof, like Jennifer, they're a solutions architect role fairly simply. So you can all do the role. You just have to get the right set of skills. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about the right set of skills, but they're not in the certification. All the certification in today's world is a vocabulary test. The exception is the Cisco Certified Internet Expert and the Cisco Certified Design Expert. Both of those certifications have enough knowledge in them that they will most likely prepare you for a role. Then again, the CCIE is $10,000 to $20,000 to be able to pass that exam minimum, and about 50,000 pages of reading. And the CCDE is just as complicated. So let's take the next question, and we are live right now. So what are my thoughts on AI's impact of the cloud architecture field and career? It's the best thing that ever happened for us. So here's why architecture is so good for architects and so damaging for engineers. It's the reason why we had a cloud engineering program, and it was good. And 3 years ago, approximately, I told all the students in the cloud engineering program, we're going to continue this program for you for about a year or 6 months or whatever it was. And if you want, we're going to give you a free upgrade to our cloud architect program, because we don't recommend that you stay in an engineering environment in the world of AI. So let me explain to you why this occurs. AI gives every business the opportunity to be better, to be more efficient, to enhance their revenue, to decrease their operating expenses, to improve the customer experience. AI is great for that. Now, who are the people that walk into an organization and evaluate the organization's pain points, look at the organization's business strategy, speak to stakeholders across the entire organization, lead an architecture team of 15 to 150 people based upon how big your architecture is, document your architecture, present your architecture to stakeholders, get their feedback, re-lead your team in designing the architectures, ultimately presenting your architectures to the C-suite and the board, getting funding for your architecture. That's all person-to-person work. And that's why AI creates more architect jobs. Now, all of our job is person-to-person and is strategy to strategy. So we're good because there's really no part of our job that is like an engineering job where it's basic pattern match, like code. What we do is different. Now, it's not just my opinion. The World Economic Forum looked at jobs of the past versus jobs of the future. Now, when the World Economic Forum listed a set of skills for the future, it's as if they wrote the perfect enterprise architect, cloud architect, security architect, and AI architect job description. I'll show you what I mean. Now, if I show you the job skills that are out of date, things that technology is able to replace, you can see them in this bottom left-hand quadrant. Programming, which people like me that speak multiple languages, so they know exactly what to say and communicate for business. People that me, again, that would say, don't make this, learn with this gesture in this country. Again, global citizens. AI can help us with this. Reading, writing, and mathematics, you'll notice that a lot of actuary type stuff is getting done by AI. So kind of keep these things. These are old jobs. Now, these are the skills of the future, core skills 2030. AI and big data, part of every architect's job. Technical literacy, big part of every architect's job. Creative thinking. Remember, our job is about solving business problems creatively, so that's a big part of our job. Now, our job is about making businesses more agile, so that's a big part of our job. We're constantly analyzing the trade-offs between a Cisco firewall versus a Palo Alto firewall, for example, or this key business process versus another. We're leading large architecture teams and influencing stakeholders. We have to motivate other people. We have to be very empathetic in our job, and we have to evaluate the impact of one system, one change to the system on another, and then we have to manage talent. And of course, as architects, we're constantly life learning. So these are the skills of the jobs of the future. That's the architecture job description. So I love what it does for us. I feel horrible about the impact of AI on engineers. Great question. Let's bring in the next one. If you take our cloud architect program or enterprise program, can you get a job as an architect? Of course. The whole program is to teach you all the missing skills, and you will stay on our program until you're hired. We are not a boot camp. I absolutely hate the way boot camps do business. They create a course. They have the course taught by someone that doesn't even know what an architect is. And then after, 2-3 months, they say, get out of here. And you're not getting hired. And that's why I came out of architecture retirement to actually create this course a few years ago, because there were so many people that were getting certified, but they had no architect skills. So yeah, we got architects hired constantly. And that's the thing. Our architect program's extensive. I mean, it's a good 1,000-hour program, but we'll make you a great architect. And with the skills you'll have in our architecture program, you'll have a great architect career. And it's my expectation that you will stay in this program. You'll continue to come to class. You'll continue to work with me in class and others in class until the day you're hired. So yes, you'll be able to get a job, assuming you do the course, follow the instructions, do all the work, and keep coming. You should have a brilliant career. Hi, Mike. Does this mean some personality types find it easier to move into architecture or some? Well, or being able to sell or talk differently can be taught. So let's be really fair. I'm going to let you in on a real secret. I'm very shy. I am an extremely shy individual. I am an extreme introvert. And I've learned how to act like I'm not. Now, in my spare time, you'll see me with my wife, my cat Cindy, my brother, who's my best friend, and one or two other friends. And the rest of the time, I'm by myself because that's who I am. I'm a shy guy, but I have took presentation training classes, executive presence training classes, sales training classes. And after a while, it just became normal to me. So I went from, being the person that I remember when I was in school. I was in nursing school first, and I had to give a presentation on something. And I was so scared, to being in an environment where I was told, when my first principal architect job, where I was told, Mike, you have to teach IP multicast to people globally. And then after that, I took more training on it. It's better. Now, if you actually look, the secret is out. If you look at a video between myself and Alvin DaCosta, maybe Chris can find it. We had this a few years ago. Now, Alvin DaCosta is a good friend of mine. He was my manager, and he and I used to help each other get promoted for years. He's now one of the VPs over at NVIDIA. And he actually let the secret out that Mike Gibbs was the shy introvert, that when he knew me, if we had to go to a meeting, when we had to go to a work event, I would either get a bottle of Silver Oak and sip the wine in the corner or drink some Macallan 18 in the corner because I'm shy. But I got over it. It'll be taught. And with the right lessons and training, you'll be fine too. You're an IT technician with a Security Plus and a Network Plus. What's the next move to get you into the cloud? So bankroll timing, we need to know what job, because the cloud architect is different than the cloud engineer, which is different than the cloud network engineer, which is different than the AI engineer, which is different than the AI architect. And there's literally speaking about 500 different jobs you could do on the cloud. And each and every one of them is a different set of skills. Much the same way a pharmacist, a nurse, a physician, a physical therapist, and an occupational therapist all have different jobs and need different skills. Each one of these jobs has. So tell me the job, I'll tell you the skills. But without it, it's honestly just like getting on any random airplane. And that's why I want to be real precision with the advice. You got to know where you're going before you get on the plane. Otherwise, if you want to go to Athens, Greece, you might end up in Athens, Georgia. What are my thoughts from switching from solution architect jobs to agentic AI architect jobs? Can I give us a plan for the UAE job market? Not much opportunities here. So the first question I have is, are you kidding? There is so much AI architecture opportunity in UAE, in Qatar, in Kuwait. I mean, so much opportunity. It's absolutely incredible. It's so big, the opportunity there, that I used to fly back and forth to Dubai. I helped set up the first voice data and video system. I know so many people that are deeply engaged over there. So lots of jobs for AI architects. Now, the key to remember is an AI architect is going to be working across the entire business. That means they need to understand how people do their jobs, where the pain points are inside of the business, where the weaknesses are inside of that business architecture, and then how can you solve them? So a real AI architect has to have a lot of business executive skills, because anybody can build an AI system. Look, everybody's doing it right now, but 90+% of companies are getting nothing out of it. They're wasting money and getting nothing, and they won't continue that. So there's huge opportunities for all kinds of AI architects in the Middle East. Huge. But, when you're dealing with jobs in the Middle East and you're dealing with high paid roles, you have to look at what they're looking for. They're looking for great strategists. They're looking for people that can walk across boundaries and cultures and people, various silos inside of the business. They're looking for people with the business skills that can build the business case, that can justify financing and investment from other sources, because somebody might be financing your multi-billion-dollar architectures. And there's lots of opportunities. So join me on our architecture webinar, and I'll tell you how to be an architect. And then what I do is I probably do it once a month. I wish I could do it more frequently. I actually hold a webinar with David Lithicum on how to become an artificial intelligence architect. And there's actually a YouTube video on our channel about how to become an AI architect, but I don't think I'd be focused on just agentic AI. I'd be focused on AI. And that's kind of the biggest issue that I want you to think of. Your value is in your ability to drive change, to drive enhancement. Now, that means that if you know AI, whether it's machine learning, whether it's generative AI, whether it's agentic AI, whether it's some type of other visual pattern matching technique that you're using, means you got access to all the tools. If you're only focused on agentic AI, well, you're not going to be helpful to every business, because not every business is going to be using agentic AI. Maybe some are, some won't. But if you learn AI architecture, it'll be available everywhere. You'll be much more valuable. So that's what I would recommend. So there's many opportunities there. You just need to know how to look for them. You need to know which recruiters are there. You need to have the right LinkedIn profile. You need to create the right kind of LinkedIn content. And believe me, there'll be lots of people to say. And I've spent plenty of time in Dubai, plenty of time at the Jumeirah Beach Hotel, plenty of time on Sheikh Zayed Road, and plenty of times all over UAE. What a great place it is. Great question. Come to the webinar. So Chris from my team actually dropped the link because several people have asked about our training program. So he dropped the link, and he also made it known that, until July 5th, because for the July 4th holidays, we're at 50% off, and that will end very abruptly on July 5th. I wish we could keep the sale up longer, but we can't. Chris, bring in the next one. Do I consider a cloud architect a cloud platform architect? Absolutely. So a cloud architect is a platform architect. A network architect is a platform architect. An AI architect is a platform architect. So I'll kind of show you a couple other kinds of platform architects along the way, so you can see how the focus of the platform architect is so much bigger in scope than that of, say, the solutions architect. So here, I'll give you two. So if we look at the AI platform architect, which is what we train, what David Lithicum trains. Now, I don't train AI architects because I only work with AI since 2001. David Lithicum's our chief AI architect instructor because he started working with AI in the around 1985. His AI knowledge was so good that in the 1990s, he was working at NASA for his AI abilities, and he's been working with it. So an AI architect is also a platform architect. And in that, they're focused on predictive AI and generative AI and agentic AI and computer vision. Every AI initiative that's going to make that business more profitable, reduce operating expenses, enhance revenue, whatever. Now, again, with security architects, another platform architect. And that's because they're focused on IAM, network security, cloud security, application security, data security, the big picture. Where that solutions architect is this one little project or this one little workload. So the answer is hope that actually helps. But yes, it's definitely a platform architect role. Good question. Just realized your first message wasn't sent. My apologies if we answered this. To get the door open for enterprise architect interviews, what certs will be ideal? So great question, Joshua. Now, Joshua, the first thing we focus on is the actual architect skills. So go through all of what you're going through. I know you go through the intro to tech, go through the architecture modules. And then 9 months from now, when you've got the skills, 6 months from now, or whatever it is, based upon how many hours you work, that's when we knock out the TOGAF 10 for you, maybe the Azure Solutions Architect Expert, and that's going to make you look really, really good. Now, if you are in our Cloud Architect program, which you have access to as part of our Enterprise Architect program, we would also teach you the CISSP, because that's one of my favorite certifications. And here's the reason. As soon as I put that on a Cloud Architect's resume, they get so many interviews because it shows that they've got a good intro to security. So that's one of the ones that I typically start with. So for the Enterprise Architect, maybe the TOGAF 10 and the Azure Solutions Architect Expert. For the Enterprise Architect, Joshua, it's going to be more about you following the branding and marketing content, following the resume training inside of our course that we're going to give you, translating your past life experience into things that are very relevant, being able to whack that hiring manager over the head with the resume that's going to show them what you can do, what you want, and what's in it for them to hire you. You going out there and creating some thought leadership that shows that you understand the pain points and the challenges, and putting that out there, which is going to show, wow, this Joshua person's a real deal architect. They get it. They're not talking about a tool or their last 20 certifications. They're talking about how to drive change, align business goals, people, strategy. That's why you're going to do it. And then when you're going to get your interviews, you're going to be so good from all those other things that you're going to realize that TOGAF 10 and that Azure Solutions Architect Expert, which we teach you. We also teach you the CISSP, but I probably wouldn't do that for an enterprise architect. It's just about interviews. So those are the two that I want you to do. Now, why did I say 2? And I mentioned 3 for the cloud architect? Well, it's for this reason. As you move up into your architecture career, your certifications become much less relevant. At some point, your certifications will actually haunt you. And I'll explain what I mean by that. When I was at Cisco, one of the VPs at Cisco said, Mike, I need you to remove the CCIE and the CISSP from my business cards. Now, the CCIE was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The CISSP, I spent about 2 weeks to really pass that, to really learn those materials. So that wasn't a big deal. And when I said to my manager, I said, you want me to get rid of my CCIE? I mean, this was harder than my MBA. And my manager says to me, Mike, I have you in an executive role. You're functioning as a chief architect for an entire healthcare vertical. The next time you meet with the client's executives, do you want them to see you as a C-suite and board advisor, as a strategic advisor, or do they want them to see you as a techie? I said, strategic advisor. He said, so take those certifications off your resume and off your business cards. And I did. Now it's my own business. Now I'm in charge. Now I'm training the next generations of architects. And I've got my CCIE plaque back there because I feel like it. My number is 7417, if anyone's curious, back when it was a miserable 2-day exam. But that's why certifications are the last thing. Because you know what? You could be like some of my students that create such good social media content while they're there. They create such a good portfolio. They master the skills and they get hired with no certifications. I still recommend you get them, but you're hireable without certifications, but you're not hireable with certifications and no skills. And that's the biggest mistake people get. People assume certifications give them skills. Certifications enhance your brand. They enhance your credibility. It's like that beautiful plaque around me that says, I probably know networking. But even if I didn't, the plaque would be there. I do. But the plaque only proves that I knew networking in September of 2000 or whatever it was. So kind of hope that helps. No, May of 2000. Hope that helps. Great questions. Also, is it necessary to have a college degree? No. Now, Joshua, I have mixed feelings about degrees. I like higher education. The best investment anybody can make is in themselves. Some people try to get 5% return on here or something else when they could get a couple 100% and double or triple their salary. So the best investment is education in yourself that is going to get you better at your role. Now, having said that, College doesn't necessarily do that anymore. And because of that, most organizations don't seem to care about degrees like they used to. Microsoft dropped degree requirements. Amazon dropped degree requirements. Cisco dropped degree requirements. I think it's Delta Airlines dropped degree requirements. And so many other big enterprises have gotten to the point that says, I need people with skills. I need people with capabilities. I don't care how the person learned it. I don't care if they took night classes, took a training program, got an executive coach, read 1,000 pages a day, or attended college. I just need people that can do the job. And when it comes to architecture roles, look, there's millions of certified people. But I'll tell you, you give me someone that's passed an AWS certification and I ask them, what are the architectural trade-offs between an ARM type processor and a AMD type processor or an x86 processor? And they don't know. If I ask them, what are the architectural trade-offs, the strengths and weaknesses of a bare metal server versus a virtual machine versus a container versus application virtualization versus a serverless function, they won't know. Now, if I ask them what's in the header of an IP packet, and based upon what's in the header of an IP packet, what things can you do from a security perspective, they still won't know. And if they say your job is to secure a website, could you tell me how a host connects to a website and every step that occurs along the way? Because you can't secure what you don't understand. They won't know if all they've done in certifications. That's why certifications are last. But you don't need a college degree either. But please, every day, better educate yourself. Improve your business skills, improve your executive skills, improve your sales skills, improve your business acumen. And Joshua, when you get a great architect job, they'll probably pay for your degree, and it might be worth letting them do that. I know they help pay for my MBA. Great questions. Do I offer resume writing for these cloud architect roles? Yes, our students in our cloud architect program have extensive resume training. And our team will review their resumes and provide guidance on their resumes. So yes, it's part of the job. So, for us, and actually, we've got 5 phases. Phase 1 is teaching you how to do the job. Phase 2 is molding you what the hiring manager wants. Phase 3 is you doing the job with an architect title, building a real world architect portfolio so you have real experience and can prove it to the manager. Phase 4 is when we do certifications, we do resume, we do LinkedIn. And then 5 is where we prepare you for the interview. And we even teach you how to negotiate and when to negotiate and when not to for your salary. So this is everything. And here's the reason I have to do everything. Because the majority of people have never had a $200,000 plus role. The majority of people have no idea how to create a resume for an executive. And, if you actually speak to David Lithicum, you can check his YouTube channel out, the Cloud Computing Insider. Fantastic architect with about 35 years experience. If you ask me, I've got 26 years of architecture experience. And David and I will tell you that if we see 100 resumes, maybe 1 to 3 that we'll actually bring in for an interview, because the rest of them look like engineering resumes. They don't show the business impact. They don't show how they change the business. They don't show any leadership. They don't show any executive skills. They just look irrelevant to us. They look like someone put a bunch of tech skills down, and the skills section doesn't belong on an architect resume. They put a bunch of tech jargon, and again, that doesn't help. We're not engineers. We're a very different job. So yes, we absolutely do teach this because it's critical, because most people just won't know how to do this. I know I didn't. And I got coaches along the way, and once I did, now I know how to create one. Let's bring in the next question. And if you're having a good time, maybe give a like, subscribe, send this video to a friend, invite them. Hi, Mike. You heard about a cloud architect from your lecturer and interested in it because it's the norm. It's not the norm job. It's an executive job. It has an average pay of $201,000, at least in the US, and it goes much higher than that. So it's not the norm where you reside. You live in a third world country where people go for popular tech jobs. I'm from Greece. I know what that's like. And you want to know if you should start becoming a cloud engineer to get hands-on experience before you switch to a cloud architect. Well, here's what I want you to understand. The cloud architect job and the cloud engineering job are very different jobs. In that, let's say the airplane pilot flies the airplane, and the flight attendant that's in the back of the plane brings you your drinks and keeps you safe in the plane. If you went to school to become a flight attendant, worked for 50 years as a flight attendant, if you decided to say, I want to go from flight attendant to airplane pilot, you would have to go to flight skill and you would have to learn a completely new set of skills. When I have people that become cloud engineers, even with 10 years of cloud engineering experience or 15 years, they're not going to become an architect. And the reason they're not going to become an architect is they know how to build things. They know how to use tools, but they don't know how to walk into the client and evaluate their business, evaluate the business architecture, evaluate the pain points and inefficiencies in the system, can't quantify the size of a business problem, can't create the team of people that's going to lead that actual architecture strategy. They won't know how to present that architecture to the executives to get it funded or really know any of the architecture things. No, don't get me wrong. I've had lots of engineers. Naformi, for example, came to me and he's now in a cloud architect role. He had been a network engineer for about 15 years, but we developed his business acumen, his leadership, his executive things, and poof, he's a cloud architect. Harsha was another example. Cloud engineer for 14 years. This guy is so smart. He's got Kubernetes patents out there. I mean, he's freakishly smart. Now, he came to me, and it took me a year and a few months to get him into an architect role. Now, the reason it took a year and a few months is we had to get him to stop thinking like an engineer, because engineering thinking is different architecture thinking, change the way he thought about his job, learn a completely new set of skills, and he was there. Naformi, same thing, over a year. Now, at the same time, Wallace Agana was a sales rep, went to a job higher than the cloud architect job as his first job. R, for example, was another person that didn't have a tech background. He went to interview to be a security engineer, and they said, R, are you serious? You're way better than this. So then he went on an interview, and he went to the cloud security architect interview that they sent him in. They said, all right, I can give you this job, but you're above this. And then he took a job in the CISO's office as a security architect. So getting hands-on experience in engineering will give you hands-on experience in engineering. Working as a nurse will not make you a better doctor. The nurse carries out the plan. The doctor builds the plan. The architect is the same role as the doctor. They prescribe the plan. The engineer does the same thing as the nurse who builds the plan. But unfortunately, people don't learn how to do surgery by being a nurse. They don't learn how to make a medical diagnosis by being a nurse. So if you want to be a cloud engineer, it's a great job, especially in the developing world. And I think it's terrific. If you want to be an architect, what I want you to realize is being an engineer will not make you an architect any more than learning how to fly an airplane will make you an attorney, because it's a different job. But it's a great job. It could be a good job for you. And if you love that job, I'd like to do anything I can to help you get it. But that's realistically what we're referring to. You're in Asia with no cloud background. If cloud architect jobs are mostly senior level, they're which charge jobs? So they're not senior level. They are intermediate level. So a chief architect is a senior level job. A distinguished architect is a senior level job. A principal architect is a senior level job. A solutions architect or a cloud solutions architect is an entry level job. Now, all people call it senior level, but it's not senior level. It's the right set of skills. Now, I'm going to tell you, I know people who, literally speaking, in their first day of their first job, did surgery on people. I know people on the first day they were hired, they were flying an airplane with people whose lives in there. I know people on their first day of work that were an attorney defending someone in a trial. How did we get these good jobs? We go to school for them. In my first job as a nurse practitioner, I was practicing medicine. I had my own office. It was life and death decisions I made. I had the skills. I went to school for 7 years to develop the skills. That was entry level. Now, mind you, there are medical assistants in the office that, is entry level. There are technicians in the office that are entry level. There are secretaries in the office that are entry level. And then the doctor is entry level too, because the first job they get is as a physician. So It's about having the right set of skills. It's about having the right set of branding. It's about having the right competency. It's about building the right brand to get people to come to you and being able to prove it to the world. And it's pretty easy on an interview. I've hired lots of people with no background. I've also passed on people with decades of experience. So you really want to know what it comes down to in an architect interview? Do you want to know what we hiring managers really look at? Do you want to know how we determine who to hire or not to hire? So I'm going to show you someone that has huge technical knowledge that we will never hire. Let's say this person has 10 years of engineering experience. Their executive presence or the ability to command the room, poor. Their business knowledge, poor. Their communication clarity, average, not good enough for the architect role. Their technical judgment, exceptional because they've been an engineer for 15 years. Their ability to connect with an executive, influence the C-suite and the board of directors as a trusted advisor, they don't have it. They've got average energy enthusiasm. I can't hire this person because they have no idea how to do the job despite their 15 years of experience. Now, you give me this person. Their executive presence is great. Their business acumen is strong enough. They communicate really well. Heck, it doesn't have to be technically strong. We're going to get it to strong. But their trusted advisor mindset's exceptional. Their energy, enthusiasm, attitude is exceptional. That person we hire. So that's the key. We hiring managers look at all attributes of you. Now, I don't want you to worry about the job description. That's the next thing I'm going to say. Every job description requires 10 years of experience. Do you want to be a secretary? You need 10 years experience. Do you want to be the fry cook at McDonald's? You need 10 years experience. You want to be the front desk receptionist out there? You need 10 years experience. So don't worry about any ridiculous job description. Here's the reason why job descriptions don't matter. We don't create them, the hiring managers. I can tell you exactly how every job description I've ever seen was created in my life. I went to HR and said, I want to hire a cloud architect or a security architect or network architect, more likely in my life. Then HR says, Mike, got it. I'm going to write a job description. And I asked HR, do you know how to write a job description for my architect job? We know what to do, Mr. Gibbs. Don't worry about it. So then the HR person who doesn't know the difference between a security architect, an airplane pilot, an attorney, a fighter pilot, a Navy SEAL, or a sailboat operator is now writing a job description for an architect job. And then what they do is they just put a bunch of silly things. Here's why they put it down. They don't want someone that's got 10 certifications that doesn't know the job. They want someone that can actually do the job. So it doesn't matter. You know, to be fair, when the first job that I took at MCI WorldCom, they wanted 10 years engineering experience because my first job was a senior engineer. I had none. 3 months later, I was in a lead architect role. They wanted 15 years experience. I had none. I left there to go to Wall Street, where they paid real money, more than I could have ever imagined spending. And they wanted 15 years experience, but I had 6 months. They didn't seem to care. A year later, I was hired by Comcast as a principal architect, and I had a year and a half experience, but they wanted 15. So it's not experience, it's competency. And that's the rationale. Got to be great because I can't hire anybody. And because of the shortage is so bad, that's why we're willing to be more open-minded. And if you actually understand this, if you look at all architect roles, the highest paid, for the most part, most strategic of the architects is actually the enterprise architect. Statistically speaking, the data out of Penn State is that 50% of enterprise architects didn't come from a tech background. I know I didn't. I came from medicine. But I've been an architect for 26 years now. Two questions left. We have two more questions that we for today. If you study full-time a year in our program, is it true realistic to land an architect role? The answer is yes, because they're not senior level. I can show you what a senior level cloud architect role is. It might pay $800,000 a year. You'll be leading architecture teams of 200 people. You'll be managing $1 billion plus budgets in a senior cloud architect role. That's a senior architect role. Many of these cloud architect roles are not that. You might work with a small customer. Maybe they only have 10 or 15,000 employees. That's a typical first job for someone. Or A lot of first jobs are solutions architect jobs. So Arun, for example, was working at a Home Depot before he came to us. He left our organization and joined TELUS as a solution architect as his first tech job. Now, Jeffrey was GIS imaging, geospatial imaging, before Kalian hired him as an architect. Lenny was our video editor before he went over to Citrix as a solutions architect. Bellwether was a stay-at-home mom. So, Camille was a nurse practitioner before she got hired as the director of cloud architecture. Wallace was a sales rep. I mentioned him earlier. But Emmanuel over in the UK, I don't know what it was, but he wasn't in a tech role, but he's now in a serious tech role. So it's not about your background. It's about your capabilities and what you can do and how you prove it to the management, your brand, and everything that you have along the way. That's really the key. So could you do it in a year in my program? The answer is absolutely yes. Will you do it in a year? I'm not sure. You might be one of those people that can study 16 hours a day and get it 9 months. You might be someone that does not have a lot of time and take longer. Now, if you train with us, I don't care how long you stay on the program. I just care that you're hired. And whether you were Richard O., who took my program, and as soon as within 3 months of being in my program, he had a technical account manager offer at AWS, and he chose to take it. I don't care if you like Delroy Batt, who took my course, and somehow somebody offered him a cybersecurity engineer job within the first 3 months that he was in my class. He said, "What do I do, Mike?" I said, "Take that engineering job and stay with me." And a year later, he got hired as his first tech job with CDW as a cloud security architect job. So the answer is, but at the same time, it might take you longer. And I've had examples of people that needed 2 years inside of the program. They have less time to get through. And Kamal is the example of the student that took the longest to get through my program. And I have deep respect for him. Kamal came to me 5 years ago. He's now working as an architect. But when he came to me 5 years ago, he said, "Mike," he said, "I work at the hospital. I provide radiology cancer treatment to cancer patients." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "I work 60 hours a week." And I said, "Oh, you're not going to have a lot of time for studying." And he said, "I also have a lot of kids." And I was like, "Kamal, so well, we can get you there. It's just going to take more time." 4 years later, he worked at American Express. A year after that, he's now at Johnson & Johnson in a better job. So the answer is yes, but you're going to have to be right. Let's bring in the next one, Chris. How can you get interviews? Very easily. You contact recruiters to put you on interviews. You create the LinkedIn content, the right thought leadership. Robert was a student of mine. Every time he created LinkedIn, he would get 3 to 5 interview offers. But the interviews are nothing. Getting interviews is so easy. Winning the interviews is the issue. Anybody can get an interview. And here's how you know. If you've ever been on an interview, and I know people that have been on hundreds of interviews and they keep getting told, "Mike," or when they keep getting told, "Come back when you have more experience." Now, if they've got 30 years of engineering experience, they get told, "Come back when you have more experience." If they have no time, they get told, "They come back when you have more experience." And you know why? You know what the whole experience thing is? It's all nonsense. On my first job over at MCI WorldCom, I interviewed someone, and I can remember the interview. The person had a great resume. They had lots of experience. I said, "What do you know best?" The person said, "The routing protocol OSPF." I said, "Great. Tell me about the type of LSAs and OSPF, what those LSAs do, and how the routers use them." He said, "I have no idea." I said, "What else do you know?" And he said, "BGP." I said, "Talk to me about the BGP finite state machine." And he had no idea. I said, "What do you know?" And he said, "Mike, I really am good at IP address planning." And I said, "Talk to me about planning an IP addressing scheme for an enterprise." And he had no answer. So I walked him out. I said, "Thank you. It was so nice to meet you. Now come back when you learn networking." My manager read me the riot act. He said, "Mike," he said, "here's what every hiring manager knows, and apparently I need to teach you. If you can't hire someone, you can't tell them they don't know anything. Just tell them they don't have experience." And that was the secret. So there are so many people that'll go on 100 interviews and they'll get told, "Come back when you have more experience." But here's the thing. You know what cost me as an architecture manager to interview you? Minimum $100 a time. Minimum. And It's $100 a time for about 8 people to see if you're ready for the job. So it's going to cost me about $1,000 to interview. I'm not going to interview you unless I have any confidence that you can do the job. So if you get an interview and don't get hired, it's due to competency, it's due to attitude, it's due to communication skills, it's due to leadership skills. It's not related to experience. And that's why I get people rehired every day, because they come to me, they've gone on 30 interviews, they've got 20 years experience, no years experience, but they have all the wrong skills. Mike, I can code Python. And I say, great. Now, how do you build a business case? Mike, I know how to set up an infrastructure as code script. Great. Can you explain your architecture's impact on the organization's EBITDA? Well, no, Mike, I can. Well, come back to me when you can. So not an issue of where you're at. It's an issue of how to get there. Is that the last one, Chris, or do we have one more? Many job descriptions ask for finance experience. Yeah, you have to understand finance for this job. It is impossible. And we teach finance for that. Of course, we teach people how to work with various verticals like healthcare or finance because it's part of the job. But yes, you have to understand finance. That doesn't mean you need to work for a bank, but it means you need to understand finance. So if you're asking if you have to work for a bank or a semiconductor person, no. I've never worked for a semiconductor person in 26 years of experience. Not once. I have consulted the banks. Definitely, I've consulted the healthcare organizations and I've consulted the greater enterprises, but I never worked in a bank. I've designed, well, it's not true. I worked on Wall Street for 1 year, but I never was like a normal banking job there. So no, you definitely have to understand business. You have to have the business acumen. You have to have the executive communication. You have to have the executive presence. Because the job is very much like the management and strategy consultant role, which is often people's first job out of business school. I may not be understanding your question. Now, if you're asking, do we train you for a specific industry, like a healthcare architect role? No. I train you to be an enterprise architect, a cloud architect, a security architect, an AI architect. But I don't train you to be, say, a banking architect. Having said that, lots of my students get jobs for banks as architects in banks. Lots of my students get jobs in healthcare. So I think we answered your question there. So at this point, I think we had a lot of great questions today. So I'm going to invite everybody to the webinar tomorrow on how to become an architect. We're going to be talking about enterprise architects, but you can ask me about any question you desire, anything related about building a career. You'll be able to come off mute, ask questions, and we'll be able to do anything we can. We'll be able to assess you. We'll be able to guide you, and it's free. So I hope to see you there tomorrow. Now, also in the description of this video, there are many things to help you build your career. So many things. I hope you sign up. They'll be emailed to you. They're all free. If you want to be an architect, I hope you take advantage of this 50% off sale opportunity and invest in yourself and build an architecture career that you're going to love. An architecture career that's going to pay you something that'll give you a good lifestyle. You'll be respected in your role. And it'll be a job I think you'll love. It's the best job I ever had. And if you had a good time, maybe hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell a friend about what we do around here.